Most enterprise AI programs don't fail because the tech is bad. They fail because leaders start in the wrong place. Quick test. If your CEO asked, where do we start? Would your answer be a tool or a business outcome?
Today's guest is Ajay Dhaul. He's had 25 years leading global AI and transformation across companies like J&J and Kenvue. He's built enterprise capability centers from scratch, and now he advises CEOs and boards who are trying to turn AI from experimentation into real commercial advantage. In this conversation, we get brutally practical. How to follow the money without losing the customer, how to get the right tiger team in the room, why product management beats IT-led AI, and what actually separates strategy decks from the execution in the engine. This is the playbook for executives who want AI to create value, not noise.
I think, Imteaz, that the time for proof of concepts and second guessing this technology is over.
Hey everyone, welcome to a brand new episode of Reimagine with AI, brought to you by Sigloid. I'm your host, Imteaz Ahamed, and I help executive leaders create value with the smartest minds in artificial intelligence. You may not realize it, but behind every major innovation in retail, media, and technology, there's a team wrestling with how to make AI real and valuable inside massively complicated matrixed organizations. On this show, I sit down with the business and technology leaders who are doing exactly that. Reimagined AI explores how today's most forward-thinking enterprises are using data, AI, and automation to transform how they operate and how they grow. Because it's not just about adopting new tools, it's about reimagining what's possible. Let's get into it. Welcome to Reimagine with AI. Today, I have Ajay Dhaul here with me today. Ajay brings an extensive background and experience with the likes of J&J and Kenvue, where he led global capability teams across AI and tech for over 25 years. Ajay, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Imteaz. Very happy to be here with you.
I love talking about strategy and transformation, especially when it comes to the enterprise. With this extensive background, you've seen so many projects, so many transformations across CPG and across global functions. Specifically, I wanted to ask you about when you were appointed to lead global AI and transformation at J&J and then Kenvue, where did you actually start? And what was the first lever you pulled to actually move the organization in the right direction?
Yeah, Imteaz, a great question. And I'll go back in time, 5 years. I'd say first and foremost, I followed the money. I'm an executive that grew up in the business and then quickly had to reinvent myself to learn about all things around data, emerging technology, and AI. And it was essential for me that as we took on this enterprise transformation, that the first thing we did was double down on following the money. The number two and very important piece was to really stay focused on delighting the consumers and the customers of our products. And then last but not least, to ensure that we were very much informed with a strategic plan in terms of growth acceleration for the business. And those are the three factors that really got us focused in terms of where do we get started. And a place that we then began to very explicitly focus was shelf intelligence, meaning the point of purchase. When our customers and consumers come in to purchase our brands and our products, we wanted to make sure that they always had a tremendous experience and always had whether the physical shelf or the digital shelf with the right product at the right price at the right time so that their requests were fulfilled.
So in essence, following the money is always the objective that people have within enterprise. Now, at a 50,000 feet view, when you're trying to implement these new programs, everything looks really nice on a strategy deck, right? But what really makes the rubber hit the road when it comes to execution? How do you translate all of this AI strategy and actually make it work on the ground, especially in these very large organizations?
Yeah, Imteaz, that's a great question. There's a very far distance between the executive and the C-suite and what happens in the engine room in an organization. And I think pulling that thread requires a lot of hard work, a lot of intention, a lot of creation of psychological safety, especially in organizations that are taking on new journeys like artificial intelligence. But it also requires a lot of ongoing support and sponsorship across multiple levels of management in the organization. Now, the things that we've learned and that I've learned through my journey is, first and foremost, it absolutely helps to have the business in the driver's seat. It's very important that there's clarity in terms of what are the business outcomes, what is the business problem that we're trying to solve. And in a sense, that kind of gives an anchor and gravity to the initiative and or on a broader scale of transformation. Second thing is, once you've got the outcomes clarified, it's important to then bring a whole host of cross-functional leaders in the room to really understand the interdependency in terms of what would it take to drive the achievement of the business outcome. And that needs to come from the different functions. It needs to come from the technical community, the data teams, the machine learning teams, the data scientists, the generative AI specialists. And once you stitch it all together, having clarity in terms of a project charter, clarity in terms of the metrics, that begins to really mobilize the momentum that's needed in these enterprises. The second thing I would say that's really important is enterprises that are living into product management, which is really the combination of a business leader and a technology and data leader being jointly held accountable to the outcomes. In my opinion, those are the organizations that see greater success because there's a shared accountability and a great commitment across both the business functions and call it the technical functions to achieve a desired outcome.
So I love the point on shared objectives between technical teams and commercial teams. I've seen too many times where a technical team just wants to try out the newest technology and the commercial team's like, well, that's not useful for me. Why are we doing this right now? But coming back to your first point, in terms of thinking about how you get the right people in the room in terms of driving transformation and change, what would your feedback or advice be to bring in, I don't want to say the right number of people, but the right stakeholders to drive the change? Because, in so many of these organizations, there's too many people you can talk to and there's too many stakeholders to manage. How do you find the balance between getting the right people in the room versus over bloating and not getting the project started?
Yeah, Imteaz, I think that's a great question. I would say at a minimum, what's important is that there is alignment at the leadership level, both in terms of the business leadership and what I'm going to broadly say is the technical leadership. So I think having the two leaders in the room is a recipe for success as a starting point. The other thing that's very important in my experience is you need folks who eventually are going to be the recipients of the AI solution. And, the world talks about adoption, the friction to adoption. And I think enlisting the ultimate, call it consumer of the AI solution, having that person involved early on is very, very important because in a way, not only are you building alliances and adoption at the outset, what you're also doing is you're beginning to upskill and create exposure for the business owners around this new world of artificial intelligence and data. What I like to say is they begin to see how is the sausage really made, because ultimately they're the ones who are going to then apply it. Hopefully it's integrated into their flow of work. But remember, they're the ones who will ultimately monetize and extract the value that the entire project and programs are all about. So I would say that having the end, call it internal customer of the AI solutions is important. I think having teams that also have an understanding of the process is very key in terms of bringing that expertise. And the reason to bring that process expertise is to really ensure that the AI work that's being built is being built in terms of an integration of the flow of work. And when I say AI, I also imply AI and then obviously the data and the technology experts. So, I think it's back to how do you create this one pizza team or a tiger team? I would say it's the leadership, it's the ultimate business user that's going to apply and monetize the solution. It's the technical experts, it's the process experts. And that's what I would do is to kind of get this tiger team, pull them together, give them a joint defined outcome and set them off to kind of move at speed. And the one last thing I would say is having a scrum master or a project manager always helps because you've got essentially then a conductor that's really orchestrating end to end all aspects of, moving a project with speed and with an eye to outcomes.
Shifting gears to building transformational teams, you've built a global AI capability center and data organization from scratch. What were the capabilities that you feel mattered most to build internally versus buying externally?
Yeah, Imtiaz, great question. Let me break the tension here in terms of building internally versus buying from the outside. I think, in my view, there's a lot of wasted energy in enterprises that, continues to happen in terms of do we build versus buy. My view is that we're looking for speed to value. We're looking at extraordinary outcomes for an enterprise. And what we need to be doing is to say, where is the best thinking and the best set of capabilities that are available either internally or externally, and to begin to invest in an ecosystem that is a combination of both. And especially when you're looking at moving with speed, having this inclination to kind of go tap out on the outside and bring expertise so that you get the organization off the ground, create momentum. External suppliers become a huge factor in that. And then once you've got momentum, once you've demonstrated implementation, depending on the IP or the intellectual property of that particular solution, you can have a conversation in terms of, do you integrate that internally, or do you continue to kind of work with this ecosystem of external suppliers? Now, in my particular case, what we did was we did the combination. We brought in a lot of leadership that was internal across, call it data science, artificial intelligence, data strategy, data monetization approaches, data product development. But we heavily then built, to your point, an AI hub of a number of specialists that were excelling in this field. We brought them from companies that were outside of our enterprise. They were generally within the industry, but had, in a way, we brought in talent that had worked with half a dozen of our peer companies over the course of their careers. They'd also worked in consulting companies, and in some cases had also worked in some very forward-looking startup companies. So we were able to kind of create a collection of some, what I like to say is a brain trust. And I think that was a winning combination between us in terms of the enterprise, and then building an ecosystem of both internal and external, call it stakeholders. And that brain trust became a big accelerator for our AI and data transformation journey.
Amazing. When we're talking about enterprise leadership and the value of AI, where do you think enterprise leaders are overvaluing the impact AI is going to have? And where do you think they're underestimating it?
I think, Imteaz, what I would say is the world is on a learning journey. I think none of us have figured this out. Some may be slightly ahead of others. I would say, generally speaking, large legacy enterprises, matrix footprints are still very much moving from, call it, early experimentation, nascency, to beginning to start seeing some green shoots and proof points. And I think many of these enterprises are now very intentionally focused on, how do you scale globally? How do you do this effectively? Where I think we're overestimating, in my opinion, at this point, is how fast AI can get monetized. And I think we're overestimating that there is a journey, and the two critical friction points in the organization are aspects of data. And especially in these large legacy enterprises, we typically have, fragmented, dirty data. And so that becomes, in many cases, a significant friction point in terms of how quickly you can scale and monetize an AI solution. And the other thing that we're overestimating is how quickly people are going to get behind what is frankly a very new way of working, a new set of technical solutions at a time when most of the employees, including myself, if I go back 5 years, had limited fluency in the space of AI and data. What I previously said, most of us on the functional and the business side have actually never seen how the sausage gets made in terms of the data or the tech stack. And so I think that's the piece on overestimating. On the underestimating piece, and I think I fall equally prey to this, is how quickly this technology is moving is frankly mind-blowing, right? I begin to look at what's happening. A month in the life of an AI journey is like a year in our previous, call it, lives with technology. Things are moving dynamically. If you'd asked me about a year ago in terms of agentic AI and the ability of machines to be conducting and executing actions from insights, I would have been quite dismissive. Now, at the end of 2025, I am personally blown away by how quickly agentic AI has emerged, and this ability of machines to not just do what was being done in, let's say, 2024 or the first half of 2025 in terms of knowledge-based insights, but the ability now to create connectors, the ability for execution and action being taken by machines. So I would say the piece that we're underestimating is how quickly machines are being trained with cognitive ability to be able to execute tasks. And I'm not even talking about physical AI. I'm just literally talking about all the aspects of classical and call it LLM types of generative and agentic AI. So listen, I think the future holds a ton of promise. I think it's moving really fast, and the ability of executives and enterprises to come to grips with that there is something here that's going to radically redefine how their enterprises need to get reimagined. I think that's what we're underestimating at this point.
So to say it another way, the capabilities are just growing way too fast for enterprises to adopt them fast enough from a process management point of view in terms of where we are today. Is that how you think about it?
Exactly. Imteaz, I think there's a speed with which the technology is moving, which is way faster than we, the humans, and all up the chain from the executive ranks to the boards of these companies that, we're obviously moving at a different speed. And I think that convergence will take place in due course. And the ones that are going to win are where we're going to see the leadership teams and the employees in the organizations beginning to kind of start taking monumental leaps in terms of not being dismissive of this new technology of AI, embracing it, not fighting it, using it. And I think that's the muscle, that gets developed in 2026 and beyond. And the faster the companies do it and the employees do it, they'll be the ones that will win and start creating competitive advantage for their enterprises and business models and themselves personally.
Talking about commercial competitive advantage and then creating commercial value off the top of that, what's the most overlooked lever for commercial teams when they're using AI to grow share and velocity?
Yeah, I would say, Imteaz, that a lot is being said in terms of winning with the consumer, winning with the customer. And I think this aspect of, really looking at the customer journey or the consumer journey end to end. And I think the work that is happening, it's happening in somewhat isolated ways, but needs to get stitched together, is just look at the entire customer journey and to create a level of personalization that is unprecedented, where essentially I, look at you as the one primary customer and look at you from a 360 lens in terms of all the touch points that you're going through. And then how do we create very meaningful interaction across all of the touch points that you're going through in terms of, call it, whether it's information or whether it's, call it, buying patterns. So I would just broadly say this notion of personalization and integration with you at a 360 lens. I think, that's a piece that we continue seeing companies, double down on, and having the world of AI help in that space in very significant ways. And I think those are the levers for growth acceleration, market share gains. The other thing I would say is companies reimagining their entire new product innovation. So how do you capture insights and how do you move very rapidly in terms of insights to a concept, to product prototyping, to commercialization? I think there are some very significant hacks that are now available through AI, and the quicker companies can actually transform their new product commercialization approaches by enabled through AI, I think they're going to start seeing rapid speed to market on new product ideas. And again, that velocity will lead to market share gains and growth acceleration for the company.
One of the examples of velocity, and it's some of the work that I'm currently doing through Sigmoid, is actually the media use case. So for one particular client, we are actually for a couple of clients, but for this one that I'm working hands-on with, we're literally processing millions of audiences and millions of combinations of audiences, usually a machine learning model. For a human to actually do that work, it's just physically impossible for them to manage, all of these different audiences that a media manager would actually buy. So in terms of understanding that, yes, this stuff is getting more complicated, but as long as the human who's managing the algorithm or is managing this net new process can understand how it works and can understand how to brief what you want it to do, that's how you're going to really create the value now. It's the math problems or the algorithms can be built, right? Like anything you could ever imagine from a mathematical problem has mostly been solved now. What hasn't been done within an enterprise organization is properly defining what you want the output to be and where all of those inputs kind of sit inside of your organization today. So that requires this level of understanding that the real transformation is coming through the people within these companies, not necessarily just the technology, right?
Yeah, Imtiaz, I think you've touched on something that is very salient. If you'd asked me 2 years ago, we were still learning on how do you create insights and process structured data through the world of AI. A lot of the work that was happening and has broken through has been around unstructured data, call it textual data. And obviously now we are seeing tremendous progress in terms of text, voice, image, or what's called multimodal artificial intelligence. I'll tell you what I'm most excited about is, artificial intelligence has given us the world's best assistant. To me, it's the best chief of staff. Some of the most exciting use cases that I specifically talk about is to literally look at the business user, let's say a marketer or a sales account manager, and to look at their 360 view of what their week or their day looks like, and to really then design all aspects of AI and really stitch together capabilities that can take a substantial amount of grunt work off of their plates. Just look at the amount of work that has happened and has happened in my career in terms of, looking at reams of dashboards, trying to glean insights from these metrics and dashboards. The amount of time that is spent in terms of building PowerPoint presentations to kind of convey thoughts and then, move them across an enterprise and review them multiple times. What if I told you a lot of that, as you probably know, can now be done at the push of a button, right? You've got conversation layers and structured data that can serve you insights in plain English. You can look at this latest agentic AI capabilities that will take these insights, define the actions, and again, at the push of a button, create a PowerPoint presentation. Oh my God, that's so exciting because that's where we spend a lot of time as business users through our day, through our week. And it begins to then really free up what we've all been asking for is this time to innovate, to be creative, frankly, start creating some space for thinking and future breakthrough innovation.
Amazing. So most AI transformations fail because of people and not necessarily the technology. What did you do to build followership across functions with different incentives and languages in an enterprise?
Imtiaz, working through the human friction is real, and it's the hardest part of any transformation, not just in this case AI. Like with every change transformation, I would say there's a few things that work for us that I would recommend that, all of the people listening to this pay heed to. One is, I think it's very, very important to ensure that what you're embarking on is very explicitly connected to the strategic plan and the growth objectives of the organization. I think that alignment in terms of top-down is one of the factors of organizing for success. The other thing is, in any organization, you always have employees that are called the influencers or the change makers. And I think these employees are very, very crucial to get trained on, to embrace them, to enroll them in terms of this change journey around AI. So I would heavily invest in upskilling what I would say is these change makers, influencers that are deep down in the organization across the different functions. And in a sense, they become the ambassadors of the change. They become the ambassadors of artificial intelligence in this case. The third thing I would do is assume that people have very limited fluency at all levels around this new technology. And I think investing very heavily in terms of coaching, demystifying what this technology is, I think that's very important. And one of the things we did was we took some of our early career employees that were more AI savvy, and we created reverse mentoring for our C-suite and our C-suite -1. So imagine a early career employee that's AI savvy spending one-on-one time with the CEO of the organization. Magic happens, right? The CEO is learning about this new technology. The early career employee is getting full-on visibility with a C-suite member. And I would say that these cohorts and partnerships that you create become a tremendous accelerator for learning that becomes a two-way, both in terms of AI as well as in terms of the business for the organization. So hard work, It takes time, but some of the things that, I would ask all of the listeners to kind of pay heed to.
So on culture, you've led major transformations across North America, EMEA, and other global markets. Where is AI adoption culturally the easiest versus where is it the hardest?
Yeah, great question. I don't think it's as much as geography in my experience. I would say smaller markets, smaller brands or business units inherently move faster. And so what I've experienced is that when we let these large-scale transformations, we would see some tremendous, call it early work that was emerging out of, call it smaller markets in Asia, EMEA. They are used to working with limited resources. They have a muscle, a bit like a private equity muscle or a startup muscle of, doing a lot more with a lot less. And so you inherently see a level of entrepreneurial spirit when you get away from, call it the larger, call it markets and the headquarters, and you start moving a bit on the periphery. Now, in the world of artificial intelligence, data becomes a critical catalyst, and this notion of clean, complete, connected data availability, that typically I've seen is more accessible in the US. And so, there's some balancing forces in terms of, call it this, enterprising employees in smaller markets and just the level of investment in terms of clean, complete, connected data availability. So there's a bit of a balance here, but I would say, Imteaz, that the citizens of the world are equally enamored with AI. You see them all very excited about this. They want to learn about it. They want to create a level of impact. They just need coaching. They need to get an understanding of this technology. So the folks that can demystify this, leaders in these different markets that can create alignment, that can create psychological safety, and leaders that can create that sponsorship and support, those markets and those regions are moving faster.
Amazing. You work with a ton of CEOs, boards, and exec teams. What's the one question that they keep asking you?
It's a great question, Imteaz. I get 3 questions asked all the time, literally on a daily basis, now that I'm doing a very active portfolio career of advising boards and C-suites. The 3 questions I get are, AJ, where do we start? Where do we find the money? And how do we do it? And, this is at the end of 2025, especially across large matrix enterprises. And I think those are quite revealing that I think we've all gone through a journey of experimentation, seeing proof of concepts, beginning to apply certain personal level productivity through, the different GPTs and generative AI. But these 3 questions are very fundamental to what I think is the journey over the next 24 to 36 months for the enterprises. And it's weighing on the minds of the executives and the boards on how do we really begin to look at an AI-first enterprise versus what could feel, rightly so, given the early part of the journey, as very monadic, call it proof points on AI solutions.
I have a couple of bonus questions for you, which is, what is the biggest lie that enterprises tell themselves about being AI ready?
I think we're all underestimating the criticality of data. We're also underestimating the amount of learning that organizations need to go through on this new technology. And I think the way it's translating is we are heavily overestimating and committing teams to levels of value that, especially at an executive level, we don't still really fully comprehend what's really happening in the engine room. Having led some data journeys and having schooled myself over the last many years, that's really hard work. And, in large enterprises, that's been also mostly ignored work. It was handed off to the IT departments versus the businesses really owning a critical aspect of, what is going to be the future of the world, which is a data-driven world. So I would say those are some of the big expectations that need to get clarified and calibrated as we go into the next leg of the AI journey.
I think on those 2 points around, data organization and people, let's talk about people for a second. I think somebody needs to create a coach that can teach people to unlearn how things were done, because when you embed AI into all of these existing processes, you kind of have to rewrite the process. You can't just expect AI to just be a bolt on to what you've always done for the last 25 years and suddenly, create all this value. I think you need to look at that end-to-end process, unlearn how you did it before, look at how AI could do it better with humans in the loop or without humans in the loop if you want to go all in, and then tell people you need to learn how to be cool with that or adapt to that, right? And then I wanted to also say on the data cleansing part, this is a huge problem that enterprises are facing with, data sitting in so many different locations across multiple parts of the business, but also in different geographies, in different clouds, in different data structures, etc. Another very cool Sigmoid project that I've been privy to is actually creating a thing called generative schema and thinking about how we can use this new technology of generative AI to help you organize your data. So against the people vector and the process vector, there has to be this cohesive strategy of understanding how do we use the generative AI or how do we use these new techniques to help us organize ourselves at the scale of which humans can no longer organize, the volumes that we're talking about? And then how do I equip a team to be okay with letting go with what we've always done and then adopting to what we can do? And when you can piece those two things together, I think that's when we're going to start to create real value with all this new technology that we have.
Yeah, Imteaz, I agree. I think I like what you said is there are three vectors, right? There's the people vector, the process vector, and then there's the foundational data vector. And I think you're very right. If we apply agentic AI these machines and we slap them onto, call it our processes as they exist today, it's just going to be chaos and we're going to leave a lot of untapped value. And I agree with you. I think what needs to take place, like many of the companies that are speaking to me today are saying, how do we reimagine a particular domain, a particular process, or frankly, the more audacious ones are, how do we reimagine the whole enterprise in an AI first lens? So I think that is going to be essential in terms of your process vector is we begin to kind of reimagine how things happen, whether it's new product launches, whether it's the demand creation process or the demand fulfillment process or the order to cash process. The piece on data that you mentioned is amazing because organizations that create this, what I like to say is the data spine, look at your marketed products and pull the thread all the way back to ingredients. It takes time, it takes investment, but there are new technologies that can go create these schemas, as you mentioned. That becomes hell of an investment and then becomes an accelerator for the AI solutions that you put on this, call it data spine or the data highway. And then the last piece is the people, the ability to kind of continue demystifying artificial intelligence, especially on the business user side, is critically essential for rapid adoption monetization.
Final question, AJ. What should every Fortune 500 CEO stop doing immediately if they want AI to work within their organizations?
I think, Imteaz, that the time for proof of concepts and second guessing this technology is over. I think as we embark into 2026, the C-suites and the boards should have the more audacious conversation around how do they reimagine their enterprise through an AI first and AI enabled lens? How do they begin to transform from a growth in a overall P&L efficiency standpoint? I would shift the energy there to being something that's much more broader, much more transformational versus, really second guessing what's happening with AI, where's the value with AI. I can tell you it's there. It requires the vectors that we spoke about, people, process, data, and most importantly, it requires very audacious leadership so that in the growth plans, in the financial plans, there is a level of commitment and an investment that really turbocharges the transformation of these enterprises.
Well, amazing. Thank you so much for being on the podcast today, Ajay. It's been a pleasure having you on Reimagine with AI. Look forward to talking to you again in the future.
Yeah, Imteaz, it's been a pleasure. Really enjoyed this. Thank you for all the questions. You've asked some really pertinent questions, and I'm so privileged to have shared my experience, and hopefully this becomes some valuable tips for your audience and the listeners of this.
Thank you so much. If you're still treating AI like a side project, AJ just drew the line in the sand. The real work is not the model, it's the operating system of the company, people, process, and the data spine that holds it all together. If this episode made you rethink where to start, share it with one leader in your org who keeps asking, where do we find the money? And we'd appreciate it if you left us a rating and a review on whichever platform you're listening on. Thank you for being part of the Reimagine with AI community, and see you next time.